Hello, crew. Welcome to the Rev Up, the podcast where we talk about all things revenue growth. Today on the show, I'm super excited to have my first returning guest, the one and only Charmaine Keegan. Charmaine is the director, founder of Smarter Selling. Honestly, Charmaine's one of the best sales trainers that I've encountered. She really knows her stuff. Really understands the important balance between the dynamics and the mechanics of selling, and how to really get teams in a place where they understand how to best serve their customers and how to best help their customers, and all of the skills required to take them from strangers through to customers. I feel super, I suppose, grateful because actually Charmaine's joining me today to essentially be a takeover host of the Rev Up. This was Charmaine's idea. She wanted to return the favor and interview me back. So, pretty excited for that to take place today. As always, the Rev Up is brought to you by Trust the Process. At Trust the Process, we help businesses to find amazing offshore team members in the Philippines, the right person with the right skills at the right cost. We really focus in and specialize in the areas of marketing, sales, and service with those team members. Find you the best people so that you can scale your business. We also obviously help out with things like HubSpot, getting the right systems and platforms in place so that you can best manage your business, and particularly those offshore staff that you're going to be employing. You can find out more at ttprocess.co. Please head there now if you want to reach out and say hi. You can also find some details there. We've recently launched a new service offering where essentially we are taking exactly what I'm doing here, making podcasts, making video content, and turning it into the content that will feed your content marketing strategy. And so on the website under services, there is content as a service. Feel free to go and check that out if you would like us to make exactly what we're making here, but make it for you. So as I say, super excited to speak to Charmaine. Over to us. Welcome once again to the Rev Up, Charmaine Keegan.
Hi, Ben. Lovely to be here again on your Rev Up.
Yes, so good to have you back. Look, last time we had you on the show, I think you and I must have spoken for 3 hours to eventually have a 1.5 hour podcast. I think we might still have the record for the longest Rev Up to date. So much to talk about. And after the last time we spoke, you made a suggestion to me that maybe we should flip the script a little bit. Why don't you share with the listeners what it is that we're planning to do?
Well, I thought, I've been listening to your Rev Ups and you're a really good host and you ask really good questions. And I thought there's probably lots of people that we both know that your podcast gets out to that's not really sure exactly what you do. You're asking the experts about what they're doing. And, let's just tie that back to what your organisation does, a bit about you, Ben, and then about how you're helping people, like, why you're doing the Rev Ups as well, but mainly about you. So can we flip now? Can I start?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Guest host, Charmaine Keegan.
Wonderful. Well, let's start off with you, Ben. Let's let's share your story.
I would love to. So I'm a, career salesperson. I've managed lots of teams all over the world, big teams, small teams, all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, I actually really enjoy selling for myself. I think no matter what, wherever I've gone, I've always actively been involved in selling because I think it's fun. I think it's really interesting. I think it's one of the most human things you can do in business, right? Have a conversation with somebody, understand where they're at, where they're coming from, what they need, what they're struggling with, and figure out whether you can help them in some way. And that to me is one of the most sort of fundamental human relationships we have in business or outside of business. We connect with people that we understand and that we can help, and they can help us and they understand us. And so I've always really loved it. But I started with let's call it the very traditional background that a lot of successful salespeople come from, which is the door-to-door, commission-only sales on the mean streets of Melbourne, walking around selling, credit cards and charities and energy contracts and all that sort of stuff. If I didn't make enough money, I didn't have enough money to eat or pay my rent and all that sort of stuff. I did that for far longer than most people usually do. I extended all the way to about 14 months doing that, which I think most people that try that, it's usually 1 or 2 months and then they're out. But that was because it was such a high turnover thing, because it was such a difficult thing. Nobody wanted to do it. I mean, look, first of all, they advertised it as a marketing assistant job, which tells you everything you need to know. Because so many people went through it. I was 19 years old, doing really well, and they were like, hey, have a team. And so, I was 19 years old, taking a team of, at first, a couple, and then 6, 7, 8, 9 people across the state, staying in caravan parks, working out of Albury Town Square or wherever, and walking around the streets and trying to sell stuff. So, I had my first team member at 19. I was very strange. I came back from Melbourne after finishing up doing that and wanted to work for like a big company with a very normal type role. And I worked for American Express and a few others, which was great. But I just kind of never really found myself. I was good. I wasn't great. I didn't really ever find like a moment of passion for a long time. And then I started working for an events company, B2B type events, crazy stuff that like just nobody ever knows about. You're the weirdest person at every party because someone's like, oh, I'm involved in mining. Oh, what do you do in mining? I'm involved in mining automation. And then you can just reel off 10 companies that are involved in mining, or drill and blast. Oh, what part of drill and blast are you in? Just because of the types of events we were doing, you had to be able to pick up what was happening in the industry. And I got super lucky. I met my first like really important mentor, a guy named Mike Adams, who is currently the Chief Commercial Officer of CEO Magazine. I was super lucky to meet Mike because he could see that I could pick this stuff up pretty easily. But he also really rewarded that I became a bit of a champion of the process. He was the first person that really taught me that if you figure out a process, if you figure out what works and you learn how to repeat it really well, then you can be far more successful at a far greater velocity because you're measuring against something. It's not just about the ability to take the customer through the right series of steps. It's so much easier to get better at something if you're doing it the same way over and over again. If you make it up every time, you never make any progress. And so that was super lucky for me. And he taught me one of the most important lessons about hiring leaders as well, which was hire the champion of the process, the person who understands it, who can teach it, who gets it, who can improve it, and who can champion it amongst the teams. And so I was 26 years old, 25 years old, and a sales director with a team of 28 people, which was amazing and incredibly difficult, but loads of fun. We're a super young company, lots of very inexperienced people. And so, a bit of turnover and lots of onboarding and training, but the best possible fun. And that mentor of mine moved to Singapore. And actually my first managing director in the events industry had also moved to Singapore. And I was talking to those guys and they needed someone to come over and help them kind of solve a couple of product sales problems. And so I went to Singapore. And Singapore was a massive eye-opening experience for me because I ended up working for a higher education company, sort of $500 million in revenue, thousands of students recruited from 150 odd countries around the world, all going to Australia or the US or the UK into, top universities, Australian National University, University of Sydney, Imperial College London, all of these sorts of places. And, I ended up with, at one point, a team of 200 plus across sales and operations and admissions in all different areas, doing $75+ million in revenue. And actually, I'd say the biggest lesson in all of that was I figured out what it was I didn't want to do. Reporting into the board of a $500 million company, traveling 120 days a year, you make a lot of money, but barely ever saw my family and barely ever saw my friends and had no life. And, life on the road in countries all over the world was interesting, exciting for a period of time. But, it's sometimes you learn that sort of big business career path is really exciting for someone. It's really exciting to kind of get to that point. But I realized it wasn't what I wanted. So I came back to Australia and got much more involved in smaller businesses, realized that that's what I really enjoyed, stopped working to help bigger businesses and started working to help smaller businesses, particularly when I joined the Entourage, a business coaching organization, as their sales director, and helped them to grow during everybody's favorite time, during the COVID years. I was there from October 2019, and we were a 100% face-to-face events, delivery, education company, as well as 100% face-to-face in terms of our acquisition. We did all our acquisition through face-to-face events. When COVID hit, we were in the middle of a tour about to head off to Auckland when lockdown started. And, we had to massively pivot really fast. And so move from in the office, everybody's running events and, doing those exciting things every day, to everybody's now at home. We have to deliver our product from home. We have to sell from home and all that sort of stuff we had to turn that around in weeks rather than how you would normally do something like that, doing it over the span of years. So it's been a pretty wild ride up until this point. Landed at Trust the Process maybe a year ago, because I've spent years running teams all over the world. 31 countries I've hired people in now. Did the maths the other day, and that sort of experience translates massively to an outsourcing business like Trust the Process. And so now I help our clients to figure out what can work offshore and what doesn't work offshore, and do my very, very best to tell them the absolute truth about that, which is not always the case in our industry. There's some stuff that works and some stuff that doesn't. And here we are, hosting the Rev Up, looking after growth at Trust the Process.
Wow. What a great lineup. I didn't know half of that. That was so good. But, as you started to go through each bit, it makes total sense of where you are now.
Yep.
Dealing with 200 people, dealing with people before that, being 19, having a team, obviously always open to learning, knowing, taking lessons and wisdom each time. And then, of course, you're dealing with different countries. It means you're understanding how to communicate effectively with different people. And if it's operations as well, all those different hats, it makes complete sense to me now. The jigsaw puzzles there of why Trust the Process is so successful. And so hooking on to what you've just said, you said, what does work offshore? Well, let's just say, first of all, let's go back a little step. I know you've gave us your history, but if somebody was to just look you up, can you just give us a summary of what Trust the Process actually is and how it does help small businesses? And then I'll come back to that, what works offshore.
Yeah, sure. Great. Look, Trust the Process was founded by a couple of former Army veterans. Well, I suppose they're not former Army veterans; they are Army veterans. Spent 10+ years as officers in the Australian Army, running logistics operations. Right, and so Trust the Process really is ultimately about what they learnt coming out of the military, which is everything. If you want to be able to scale any kind of operation and do anything particularly well, you need to have a way that you're going to go about creating systems and processes, right? You need to be able to systemize. You need to be able to automate and have technology take up the work wherever possible. And wherever technology can't take you, you need to then delegate to fill the gaps. Because if you can't do that, then you can't do anything at scale, right? You can only do it yourself. And so Trust the Process was ultimately built to help small businesses be able to, first of all, do the delegation, right? obviously we wanted to work with people to help them to systemize and to automate and all those things. But to start with, it was just, you need some people, right? And so we started out ultimately as an offshoring organization. And for anybody that hasn't spent any time in this particular world, there's a lot of different terminology that gets used, right? You'll hear people talking about outsourcing. You'll hear people talk about offshoring. Outsourcing being that you give somebody else a process to do. They run a process for you. That can be onshore in Australia. It can be offshore somewhere else. But offshoring ultimately being that you are hiring people in a different country to do the work for you, but you ultimately own the process. Does that make sense? Altogether, you can outsource and offshore together, but offshore is the location and outsourcing is outsourcing is where you give somebody a process to do. Somebody else does the process for you. And so ultimately now we hire talented people offshore in the Philippines for companies. We are essentially far more in our area of expertise when we're talking to people about marketing roles, sales roles, and service roles. In part because, those are between the founders, Matt and Pete and myself, those are our areas of expertise. But also those are the areas that really, if you're a small business, you probably need to be spending the largest percentage of your time and the most of your resources in order to be able to move forward. All growth is sales and marketing led. And so you have to be able to resource those parts. And let's be honest, lots of companies are finding it very difficult to find good sales and marketing resources. And so that's where we are now. We are also a HubSpot agency partner. And so that takes me back to the automation piece. We help companies implement things like HubSpot CRM so that they can manage and track their customers, their data, automate some of their processes and make sure that they have, good control over what's happening in their business.
Yeah, great. And how long's Trust the Process been around?
Would be close to 5 years now.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So looping back, that's really helpful to explain those differences. Looping back to what does work offshore, because it's been around 5 years and you've had lots of time to, when you're dealing with many people that you've been dealing with, you know what works, what doesn't work, both in your former job and now. Take us through, Ben, what works really well offshore, and then take us through why. Why does it work well?
Yeah, so I'll give you a tiny bit of context, like even actually outside of what I do through Trust the Process, I've had offshore teams for a long time, well over a decade. I've had teams in lots of different locations. And you would know this as well, Charmaine, from all the work that you do coaching businesses, right? I spent years at the Entourage, for example, coaching businesses. And the more people you get to have these kinds of coaching type relationships with, where you get to see what's happening, you get to give advice, implement, and then see the results. If you're doing that with hundreds of companies, you just get to see what works at a far greater pace and with so much more perspective than most people get the chance to. And that honestly is also the case with outsourcing, right? We work with hundreds of clients where we are helping them to execute against individual processes. We hire people for them. Those people come in and execute against those processes, and we get to see what they're doing. We're involved in their onboarding and their training, and we get to see how they work and what they execute against, and we get to see what works and what doesn't. And some of that is, we get to see it because a role is not working and we have to replace it. Right? And sometimes we get to see it because a role really, really works and then we want to rapidly scale it, right? And so there definitely are some specific roles that work well and some that don't. And the way I tend to think about it, is the thing that they're going to be doing, first and foremost, do we have a process for it, right? You should only ever attempt to outsource or offshore a process, right? If you try to outsource or offshore a problem, you tend to just get a bigger problem, right? And whenever I talk to somebody about this, it's like, what are you trying to do here? Okay, we need to fix our marketing. Okay, what in your marketing do you need to fix? Well, I don't know. That's why I need someone to tell me what to do. If that's the answer, you absolutely are not ready to offshore in particular, right? Outsourcing is still an option because you might want to go and talk to a marketing agency, for example, which is an example of outsourcing. But outsourcing agencies struggle with this too, right? I mean, I feel sorry for marketing agencies. I know there are a lot that kind of get a bit of a bad rap. How many small business owners are there out there that have had a bad experience with a marketing agency? They are just about endless. But I think most of them don't get set up for success because if you're trying to execute some sort of marketing strategy, and you are making it up from scratch, you don't yet have anything, it's really hard for somebody external to come in and be able to understand your customers well enough and to be able to understand your business well enough and your product and all of those things to take something from 0 to 1, right? When they've got a moving car and something to steer, a marketing agency for sure can come in and say, okay, well, the way that you're doing your Google AdWords could be done differently and more successfully. Your SEO is missing these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements, and that would improve it. But going from 0 to 1 is almost impossible. And so whether it's outsourcing or offshoring, do you have a strategy in place? Do you have a process? And is that process yielding some results? Because if that's the case, you're probably ready for outsourcing. And if you have a process that is working well and you just want someone to execute it, not necessarily improve it, then an offshore team member is probably right for you as well. The second way I like to look at it is ultimately about how you look at the task that needs to be done within your business. Is it something that is hugely strategically important, right? Or is it something that, is going to get some benefit with scale and repetition? So the example of this is if you're an e-commerce business and you essentially are going to outsource the running of your website, the management, the improvement, the development of your website, you are taking the single most strategically important thing and placing all of the lessons, all of the learnings, all of the knowledge about it working in somebody else's hands that is not a part of your team, where you don't really have the control to be able to document it and improve it and all those sorts of things. And so if you ever end up in a position where let's say it's an agency or an offshore team member wants to leave, which is the case obviously with internal employees too, but if you ever end up in a position where an agency then wants to leave you, they hold all of the power. And I've literally seen this with businesses where they have no leverage to negotiate, because if their agency leaves, they're screwed, right? And so if it's hugely strategically important, and we are talking about SMEs here, we're talking about founders, CEOs, and director level. If it's hugely strategically important, somebody very heavily connected to the company should have a high degree of knowledge and capability to be able to execute on that thing, right? Mm. If the thing that you are thinking about outsourcing or offshoring just requires a pair of hands, right? You know what you're doing. You just need somebody who can just do it, and it's the strategy, the capability, the knowledge are already internal at your business, then absolutely you should go and hire offshore. And so an example of this would be, again, if we're an e-commerce business and we have an e-commerce website and we need somebody to just do updates of the images and uploading products and answering customer queries and some bits and pieces like that, massively valuable, right? Those are a couple of like marketing website examples, but I think the other side of things is if you look at something like sales. So like when to outsource, to me, mostly people are going to be looking for something like cost savings. Right? That's usually the trigger point of maybe I'll look at outsourcing and offshoring is, can I save some money? But that's not always the only way that you can generate value out of offshoring. And a really good example of this is even a client of ours. where they are in the building industry, right? As part of their sales process, they have to be able to quote and tender. And if you're going to quote and tender, you have to essentially have estimators, right? If you hire an estimator in Australia, you're going to spend maybe $100,000 a year on salary on an estimator onshore in Australia, and they're going to probably be somebody with a little bit of experience, maybe not university qualified to do the work, but a little bit of experience. If you hire that role in the Philippines, you can hire a person with a civil engineering background and 15 years of experience to do your estimating and maybe your drafting, right? And so that person in the Philippines might cost you $35,000 a year. So you're paying 1/3 of the cost, but actually that's not the only benefit. The benefit is you've significantly raised the capability of the person doing the work, which means you not only pay less, but you get a better outcome. And so there's loads of these examples where we just have to think about, like, what are the tasks in the process? What is the role made up of? And what parts does it make sense to try and gain some additional skills? What parts can we really afford to save money on? And what stuff, is really super important to the customer, maybe customer facing stuff where you might want to still do it onshore. Does that answer the question? Have I done an okay of answering that?
You have. I would love even more examples. I mean, I know, little bird tells me that this construction thing's on your mind right now. So are we able to share the success of that? Just to give an example, because, I mean, you've sort of touched on it a little bit. And I think personally, if I ran that construction company, at no point would I even think about having an estimator from overseas. That wouldn't even be in my mind. So I think that's a really good example, because I think often people think of, people that are doing quite simple tasks, maybe other SEM directors like me may not be thinking of these more complex tasks. Like, that's a lot of thinking, that's a lot of doing. That wouldn't even be in my mindset. So can you share the success of what's happened to that particular client?
I absolutely would love to, and there's a success story on the way. We were literally in Victoria hanging out with these guys last week. Partially for that purpose. We did some other things as well, did some sales training with them and a few other things. But I mean, these guys are super, super smart operators, and, we would never claim credit that it was our idea as, a thing that they decided to do. But what this ultimately means for you, if you can decrease the cost of scaling, right? One thing anybody that's been in a high growth business knows is that growth sucks cash, right? It costs money to grow. And sometimes that's in resources, sometimes it's in stock, sometimes it's in additional technologies. There's costs to growth. But if you take a team where every additional person that you add on is going to cost you $80,000 to $120,000, let's say, and you say, okay, for every one of those people, right? So if we want to grow to 3 times the capability, I have to hire 3 of those, okay? If I split my team out so that all of that important customer-facing stuff gets done onshore, and some of the volume work that requires, some very specific skills, educated skills, if we break it into, let's say, 1 onshore and 2 offshore, well, now your cost of growth is essentially 1 2/6 versus 3, right? So you've almost halved your cost of your staff growth in your sales team, which means that if you have the work, which in the construction industry, everybody's got all of the work. There's no people to do all of the work. So we got to take as much as we can when we can get it. If you've got that situation and you want to grow, and now your cost of growth in terms of your resources for sales have halved, well, you can grow twice as fast, right? You're not going to be blocked as much by the cost of growth. And so, I mean, look, that individual company, I'm not going to give specifics on revenue, but they grew roughly tenfold over about a 3-year period. Super, super impressive. And, that's one of the most important things to being able to execute against growth is what is the cost of your growth and how you're going to execute against it. And so it's a great example in what is ultimately a fairly complex sales process. But anybody who has any part of their process or their business delivery that requires, skilled staff, but maybe that aren't so customer facing, there's loads of roles like that, right? Like video editing, I think, is one of the best ones. The difference in quality that you get from an Australian video editor versus a Filipino video editor is negligible, right? And in many cases, it's far better offshore. The creative stuff for things like that are amazing, but the cost of a video editor in the Philippines versus Australia is, a quarter of the price. So, wherever there's these things where there's a high degree of technical capability to be able to do it, and actually some of the creative stuff can work well. Maybe not things like copywriting, but video editing is a great example. In all of those scenarios, you can get amazing stuff. Like, look at anybody listening to this. I promise you, if your accountant is doing well at all, they probably have offshore bookkeepers, right? And those offshore bookkeepers will almost certainly have been accountants themselves. And so the quality of the work being done in an area where you probably don't need that level of qualification, you just get far better work done, still, again, at a much cheaper price. Whatever business you're in, if you're using B2B service providers, I almost guarantee that they have some offshore team members augmenting the work to increase profitability. And in many cases, you never see them, but they're doing work that is, in many cases, highly skilled work. They're just doing it for a fraction of the cost.
I think those examples are really good. Particularly the creative side, the video editing and things like that. How would somebody start this process, Ben, of discussing with you? I mean, you really mentioned they've got to have a process ready. There's no point offshoring your problem, I think your words were. Mm-hmm. So there's no point. So you've got to have your ready-made process. How would they start? I mean, how do you make it work? So when they come to you, what would be the steps of what happens? And then, like I'm a visual person. What does it look like to have a team, 1, 2, 12 people that are offshore? What would that look like? How do you make that work? So let's start from the beginning. How do they come to you? What happens in that point? And then actually the ongoing management, how does that all work? Are they part of their team? Are they in their team meetings? I just need to get a visual on it, but are they in the team meetings or are they separate? Are they run by you? Give us a top line of how that happens.
Well, one of the things you mentioned there, I think, is a sort of an element of probably the most important part for having offshore or remote teams generally, which is that they have to be your team member. I don't find that completely outsourcing, forgetting about abdicating a process is particularly effective in any scenario. So to me, look, if somebody comes to us and they have something they want to get done, the first question always has to be, is this something you're already doing or is it something new? And if it's something they're already doing, they will already have a way that they do it. Those ones I don't think are particularly difficult to get started. If you say to somebody, do you have a process for this? Their answers will almost always be no. But the truth is that they do, right? They've just never documented it. And so one of the things I like to get people to do is I say, well, why don't you just show me what you're doing? Show me what the thing is that you want them to do. And they'll share their screen. We'll be on Zoom or something like that. They'll share their screen and they'll go, well, I do this and then I do this and then I do this, and they'll click and they'll move around. And then we've got to go over here and then we send this email and etc. I'm like, okay, so everything you've just told me just then is already a process. And the good news is this Zoom is recording, so we've already captured it, right? I think that a lot of people get very scared about, or, they're they're so certain that they couldn't possibly ever make a process. I don't know what it is about the word process people get so afraid of. They're like, I don't know how to do that. That's not a thing I can do. It's like, well, you've already done it, right? You just haven't captured it in a way that somebody else can learn it. You know, when somebody new starts in your business, how do you teach them how to do this? And if the answer is, I just jump into the system and I do it, you go, okay, well, have you ever used a program called Loom, right? Yeah. For those of you out there, Loom is an amazing piece of kit. It records your screen while it records you talking, and you can just do all the things that you would normally do while you talk about doing them. And now you have training documentation.
We're obsessed here with Loom. Obsessed.
Yeah.
I mean, we have everything. We've had the words we use is it loomed? In other words, if somebody ever has to show somebody else how to do something, the first thing they have to do is go to our training modules to check it's not already been recorded. And then if it isn't, as they're being shown, it has to be recorded. I reckon we save at least 8 hours a week on that alone. The other night I was here at 10:30 at night. I need to do something that my team normally do. And I thought, how on earth do they do that? I thought, hold on a minute. And it just took me a second to go to that training folder, went down to, I think it was lead pages, clicked down to the 8th one that had what it was, opened it up. It was 45 seconds of someone explaining how to do it. I reckon that alone saved me 45 minutes and the stress and frustration. So I totally agree. People don't realize they're doing processes already. And I think they're not also used to capturing it because they don't even know these things like Loom exist to capture. Yeah. And so you think about onboarding somebody and the time sitting there explaining it and explaining it and explaining it. It's taking up your time, it's taking up their time, and then they have to remember it all. Like a week later, they've just had their brain's been opened, like you've poured loads of stuff in, and then you go deep. I talked about it on Monday morning at 10 o'clock. They're like, I can't remember, I didn't know where the toilet was on my first day at 10 o'clock. So this way they can go back and review and check. So I say the words, trust the process every day. I always go, is there a process? If there's no process, we're going to continue to make the same mistake and waste time and be inefficient. Yep. That's my sentence every day to the team. What's the process for that? What's working isn't working? That's fine. I don't care. But we need to come up with something that does work so that the next 30 times we do it, we have a process. You have to trust the process. Without a 100%. Process, you're wasting time. It's inefficient. People get things wrong and it spirals. It just needs a process.
Yeah. Are you ever going to do this again? This is the question for me. Okay, is this a once-off or are you going to do it again? How often are you going to do it again? Because something that takes 5 minutes to do now and you do it again in a week's time for 5 minutes, I know it's not much, but those 5 minutes stack up again and again and again. And if you can delegate that and you can have a process in place and you can have a documented process in place, it just becomes so much easier to not have to constantly do it. And this is the biggest frustration for most people in business is it's just easier if I just do it myself, right? And the second you create an environment where it's not easier for you to do it yourself, now you're free. Now you can actually grow your business, right? Because other people can step in. They don't have to ask you. You don't have to re-explain it every time. And you don't end up with all these monkeys on your back that you just have to carry around forever because no one else can ever do it.
Yeah. I think we've got to the point now. I think AI has probably done a lot of good things for companies like yours as well, because people are realizing all around me, people are explaining how to be more efficient and effective. And how to, in a way, that's delegating a task, right? In this form, a task that we once did that actually something else can do that's more cost effective. And I think that might open the doors for people to reach out to an organisation like yours to say, well, actually, I've never thought about this before. I think people sometimes think, then, well, I'm a small company. I've got 1 or 2 people. To me, that's exactly why you need to reach out and do it. You can then have, as you said, 3 or 4 or 5 people that are actually the same salary as one person. But it's not about the salary, it's the time and the efficiency. Like even when you just said 5 minutes a week, well, it's not ever 5 minutes, is it? Because it's 2 or 3 minutes to think about it. You got it on a list. Then you go in to do it. Then you come out of it. Well, nothing's really ever under 10 minutes, is it? So that's soon going to pay for itself in less than a month. And then you've got the next 3 years of the same person doing the job. Well, that's quite obvious that energy and effort versus outcome, that return on investment is pretty quick. So what you started to say, what good things are outsourced. I mean, I'd like to drill a bit further, if you don't mind, on, you mentioned sales. I think you then said marketing, and then you also said
service,
right? So I understand sales, I understand marketing. I think most people might think of marketing, in fact, when they think about offshoring and things like that, they might think of marketing. I'd like to drill down a little bit more on what sales you're seeing happen offshore. Is it like live chats and things like that? And also service, if you can just give us some examples.
Well, I mean, look, the estimator thing is a sales thing happening offshore for sure.
Oh, yes, that's right.
But some other things that tend to work really well. Actually, I'll share two things. You tell me which one you think works well and which one you think doesn't.
Okay.
Surprise quiz. Two things that we have people come to us for all the time that are very similar but fundamentally different. One is inbound lead management, right? They have leads coming to them. They've got a good flow of leads coming in, right? But nobody does anything with them, right? Occasionally a salesperson picks up the phone, calls a few of them, but they sit there for days and weeks and whatever, and no one does anything with them. Yeah. I see it all the time. And so they want to hire somebody to, when a lead comes in, call it immediately, get in contact with it, qualify it, book it in for, let's say, a skilled salesperson who knows the industry, whatever, to be able to then have some sort of discovery, strategy session, blah, blah, blah. So pick up a lead immediately, qualify it, book it in for a meeting is number one. Number two, which we probably get more frequently, is I don't have the leads coming in and I want somebody to make outbound calls to a list, a database. I want them to make outbound calls and book people in for discovery sessions, right? Cold list.
This is not much of a quiz, Ben. I was hoping something a bit harder than that.
Well, here's the thing, Charmaine. We get hundreds of inquiries for number two. Hundreds.
Right. Well, okay. So they need to know good marketing, good connect, well, that's HubSpot, obviously, that you do, to then all see, it's just like, it's like salt and pepper. It's like strawberries and cream. No wonder you do both businesses, because obviously what you're saying here is let's make sure people come to you. In other words, they have some need for what you have. And then the qualifying, as long as they have good scripts, we'll talk about scripts later, they know what they're doing, then they can pass it over to, I think you mentioned, a qualified sales. In other words, the expert in their field, an industry expert, the authority in their field, to then continue that. You called it uncovery, discovery, exploration, whatever you call it. Yep. Well, that makes sense, making sure that skilled salesperson is highly skilled and has coaching from somebody.
And they get the chance to be edified too, because they're being booked in as an expert, right? Like they should actually be an expert, right. But you get the chance to talk them up as an expert because you're booking in with them. Yeah. But that second option, that outbound lead generation type option, look, it can work. Lots of companies are very effective in doing outbound lead generation, but what almost always goes wrong when we work with a company for a role like that is they hire somebody in the Philippines and they give them a list and that's it. Right? Yeah. There is no process. There is no script. There is just names and a phone, and they expect them to get some results from it. Right?
But even you and I would find that, challenging, boring, monotonous, and we wouldn't even know what we're selling. And as we both know, the beginning of sales is actually your mindset and being completely sold on what you're selling and know the outcome to a client before you collaborate and engage, because that lifts you, and then you can really sit in and your intent is to understand them, which is the very beginning, so you can then help them, which is why you got into it in the first place, because you're helping people.
Yep.
And I think if you offshore that, you've missed everything out, and it becomes the good old 80s, a numbers game, which is what it used to be, right? A numbers game for that very reason. People just show up and throw up. It was just talking at. So if somebody listens long enough, they might need it at that particular moment. But you know, what's interesting with that is, if people are really investing in good websites and they're doing frequently asked questions on their websites, there's a lot of research to show that people are coming, when they do connect with businesses, they are coming in more educated than ever before.
100%.
You know, 20 years ago, like when we used to even hire people 25 years ago, it was a bit gift of the gab, some nice this goes, because that person had to be the persuader, right? Yeah. Now, when that client, when whoever they're selling to, prospect, is reaching in, they've probably done a bit of homework, looked over the website, looked at frequently asked questions, looked at some videos. I mean, I know myself, the calls we're getting now compared to 15 years ago, they don't say to me, what do you do? They go, oh yeah, I can hear your voice. Oh, you're Charmaine. Yeah, I've watched your 8 videos. And like, they're coming in at a different point in the sales journey, right? So that's why I believe if they've had some sort of lead already that's come in, I mean, first, what pains my ears to hear that they haven't got enough, that no one's big enough on the lead, all that money on marketing. But I think it's also very clever. And that's where you guys can step in to say, that's okay. We've got ready-made, qualified, coached people that are ready to go, that just need to understand about your business, and they can qualify and make that, because the person already has a need. And therefore, as long as they've got a process and a script and they know what they're selling and how to ask the questions, and they're setting up that expert, then I think that's a very clever thing. So that's one, okay, that's a good thing in sales. I think that's good in sales. Is that the main thing you do in sales?
I'll say one more thing about that particular role. And look, it's the main thing I would want to do in sales, because it solves a fundamental sales problem, which is inbound active inquiries. From the moment the inquiry is made, start to decline in conversion rates, right? And so if you have a resource whose job it is to pick up that inquiry and make sure that that person is resolved as fast as possible. Okay, so the definition of resolved is different across lots of different businesses. So for example, if I'm an electrician or a house painter, my client, my potential customer who makes an inquiry, what do they want? They ultimately want a quote. That's what they're looking for. And so speaking to that person and booking them in for some kind of discovery session is not resolved. In that industry, they're not resolved until they have a quote in hand. And in those industries, you will find that the conversion rate for the first quote is like 80, 90%, right? So in that scenario, how fast can we get it to quote, right? That's when resolved happens. But for a lot of them, it's like, how much does this cost? What's this feature about? Whatever the question is that's coming in, the sooner we resolve that question, right? For anybody with legitimate buying questions, the first person to resolve that particular inquiry, in B2B, it's like the first person to resolve is like 50% of the time the one that ends up winning. So you solve a major problem, which is if you have salespeople, and let's say, experienced, expert type salespeople, where do you want them? Do you want them making 10 phone calls to speak to one person, or do you want them in meetings? Because if you want them in meetings, they can't be the people picking up the leads, because they'll be, if they're doing a good job, then they're in meetings all day. And so then you have to tell them off because they haven't picked up the leads because they were doing a good job. It just doesn't fit. And so having both of those things covered, great salesperson who's in meetings all day, in the moment where they can have the highest impact, and then somebody who's picking up the leads as they come through and making sure that they're looked after. I always talk about them in terms of they're like a concierge. Their job is not sales. Their job is to make sure that this person who has an inquiry gets a chance to speak to the person who can best solve their problem, right? And so in order to do that, they've got to ask them some questions and understand what it is that they're looking for and where they're at and all those sorts of things. Okay, now I can pair you with the right person. The person you're going to speak to is this person. They are the right person for you to speak to because they know about ABC. They've worked with XYZ, da-da-da-da. You're set up on Tuesday at 2 p.m., right? They're a concierge to the information, to the right expertise. But that lead now, that person who was sending out inquiries to multiple companies or whatever they were doing, because they're booked in, because they've been spoken to and because they're booked in, most of the time they'll stop looking now because they know the right information is coming, even if they don't necessarily have it quite yet. Most people will act as if they're a resolved inquiry at that point. And so your conversion rates, by having a person who does that, if you have an inbound flow, they significantly improve, right? You have to move fast still. You can't have that person pick up a lead and they book them in for a meeting in 2 months' time. It's got to be like tomorrow, today, in an hour. But that to me is like one of the most no-brainer sales roles that you can have. A concierge who just picks up your inbound leads and makes sure they get booked in and fill the calendar of your highly expensive, qualified salespeople.
We call it first in, best dressed. That's it. Yep. First in, best dressed. And that's interesting. You should say that. I had a call once from somebody been on. I don't know. He'd seen me at some event, and he was in. I won't say what place he was in actually, but he sold swimming pools. So I'll keep it to the point. What he sold. And he said, "I get a lot of tire kickers. What shall I do? Get a lot of tire kickers. What do I do?" And we always look at this problem, like we want to band-aid the problem. And I thought already, I had taken a wild guess at it, but I can see what the problem is. And I said, what happens? He goes, well, people often go online at night and they want a swimming pool. They write it, they fill it all in. I looked up what they had to fill in. They had to fill in like at least 8 questions. So the person wants a swimming pool, Ben. And he said, the next day I called them up and people always, they're not really breaking it down. I said, well, when do you call them up? Because if I'm on a job, it's like 4:35. I went, you've missed it. You've missed it. Somebody else has called at 8:15, formed a relationship. He said, well, I can't because I'm driving. I said, then you do 3 calls as you drive and go, Mrs. Smith, thanks for your inquiry, But this week, offshore, because that person would have more time that's present, that's dedicated to get those questions going, to have the set questions to ask, to form the relationship enough that Mrs. Smith doesn't bother calling anybody else up, which is just what you've said, because Mrs. Smith feels that they're in the hands of the experts and they'll know enough about who they're going to pass them on to and enough about the business that the Mrs. Smith goes, oh, okay, well, job's done. And so even though that person can't call me back until 5 o'clock today or tomorrow, as you said, I won't bother calling out. And in fact, if they've already put forms out, then what happens is, which was what's happening to this guy, but he was on the receiving end, when the reps start calling back, they don't bother answering the calls because they've been locked in with somebody else. I think that's a brilliant idea to outsource that. I think it's very clever because a lot of small businesses are driving somewhere and don't have the manpower. And this guy, the light bulb just went on. He went, that is exactly my problem. I just realised that's exactly the problem. I think he said he then called, it was like he was converting 1 in 10 and now it's 9 in 10 through that one thing. But even then he can't keep on top. He can't keep on top of them because he can't always have a long enough, you've got to have that long enough call that they know they're with the expert and they've got enough information and not just a order taker of information, but they've got to know a little bit enough. What language is that? They've got to know enough to just feed a few things back, the credibility tick, we call it, you know. So the person realises they are with the authority in their field, in whatever electricians, whatever it might be, whatever business it's in. So that's so people use that for sales, obviously a lot for you. They should use that more. What else in sales might they come to you for?
So I'd say honestly, that's probably the main thing.
The main thing, yeah. Well,
if I talk about anything else other than like offshore estimators and all of the other stuff, honestly, it doesn't work nearly as well. So actually, it is a really good thing to talk about, which is we will get a lot of people with, let's say, like a $3,000-$4,000 average deal size coming to us that want to do full end-to-end sales. Oh, I go to an event once a month and I get this whole list of people and they're qualified, they're warm, blah, 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 and I want this person to call them, take them through a sales process and sell them. That end-to-end sales process stuff I tend to find doesn't work so well, right? And I think the lens to view it through is you have to understand the market that you sell in, okay? And you have to understand the environment that you're currently selling in. Unfortunately, there are a lot of scammers nowadays, right? And what do they sound like? And what are they calling for? And what are they trying to do? And if what you're trying to do with an offshore team member is even 20% the same as what all of those scammers are trying to do, you immediately are going to be in a position that is completely unwinnable. And so the great thing about something like somebody who manages your inbound leads is that you can position them in such a way that they are like a concierge. It is value add. It is premium service if you do it right. It is not potentially a scammer. And if you look at what you're asking someone to do objectively and say, could they be mistaken for a scammer? And the answer is yes, don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, that's obviously, I mean, I can think of variables where if people went to a conference, they picked up leads at a conference because the person has said, contact me, then that's the same as an incoming lead, right? That's not being answered because and then your team, well, it'll be their team, but your offshore individuals are able to say, last Thursday at the so-and-so conference, you entered da-da-da. So it's just, that's the same, just to make that clear for anybody that's listening, that there's a difference in how the leads come in. There's leads that people actually have had a concerted effort. It's been deliberate. I've wanted to be in contact with versus scooped up, which is, outbound. I've got to now persuade you that you might have this need and I've got to try and get you talking and influence you and tell you it's important to talk about now. That's what's not working, I can hear from you. I mean, that's already, frankly, a tough job for a really experienced salesperson to do. So, okay, that's good. So that's the main one. And then in marketing, take us through a few marketing roles that are working really well at the moment, your top couple of marketing roles that work well.
So anything where you need some level of technical capability, I find works really well, right? So let's say, for example, SEO, SEM, website development, video editing, graphic design, all of those types of things, I get amazing results offshore. And look, we have our own marketing team at Trust the Process. We have a content marketing team who deliver content as a service to our clients, right? You create a video with us, we take that one video, turn it into a whole bunch of pieces of content to fill your whole month's content calendar. And I think one of the biggest things for me that everyone should learn from having a team like that is that each of the skills in marketing pretty much is its own skill, right? If you're going to be a great graphic designer, you're probably not a great SEO expert, right? And so marketing's gotten so specialized, nobody can be a 10 out of 10 in all of the things. And so for the content that we deliver for our clients and for ourselves, we have a video editor, a podcast producer, audio, graphic design. We have our own website developers for HubSpot CMS, for example. But all of those individual pieces are individual skills, and mostly the people in those types of roles want to do what they're skilled for, because the more experience they get at it, the better they get at it, the better the pay they get. And so, somebody that is highly skilled in search engine marketing, let's say, Google AdWords or something like that, they don't want to be posting on your Facebook account. They want to be doing SEM. So any of those types of things. But the problem with that for a lot of companies, the smaller ones, is that if you hire somebody for an hour a day, you don't get very, very good results out of them, right? And so for most things, if you're a company that has enough scale that you can have a full-time, or let's say a minimum of like a 20-hour-a-week part-timer, where you're still probably the primary client that individual works for, or split between two. In that case, and you can have a 20-hour-a-week graphic designer or web developer or SEO expert, then that works really, really well and you can get great results. The only thing I would say about all of those things is, and I think this is generally a rule for managing people at anything, is whoever's responsible for managing the person at least kind of has to understand how the thing works that that person is doing. It's really hard to manage someone where you have absolutely no idea what it is that they're doing and what good looks like, because a key element of good management and good leadership is being able to give frank and honest feedback so that somebody can improve, and helping somebody to grow and helping somebody to develop. And if you don't even know what good looks like, you're only going to really complain about the outcome, whether the inputs are good or not. And that's a really hard person to work for, right? And so one of the things that I always look for, and where I know I'm going to get great results with somebody, is if, let's say, for example, they're even like a $3-4 million business, and they have a marketing manager who is a bit of a generalist, but they know how to do some stuff, but they are a marketing manager. That person, I 100% want to hire a graphic designer for, a video editor, whatever they need, because they at least will know the stuff that they're managing well enough that they'll be able to, quality control, give really good, helpful feedback, know whether the person is doing a good job or not. Because, this is the thing I think this is true in most of business. Sometimes great inputs don't always immediately equal great outputs as we figure out some things that we're doing. And so, this happens in offshoring a lot, where we don't immediately get the great result, and so we don't spend the time to work through getting a great result, and so we give up on it, right? And so for me, that's a big one. If they know a bit about the thing that they're hiring somebody for in marketing, then they can hire them for just about anything. The only thing I would say generally keep a little bit clear of, unless you're really willing to spend offshore, is things like copywriting. It's such a market-specific thing. Like, I don't get Americans to write copy for the Australian market, and I don't get Australians to write copy for the American market, because it's just different. And so that's probably the other one. Don't try and do copy. Don't try and do big strategic creative stuff, but creative delivery, videos, graphics, etc., is awesome.
So some listeners here, Ben, might not be big enough to have their own marketing department. They might have a separate marketing company, or a part-time marketing person, let's say.
Yep.
And that marketing company or person, they might be offshoring some of the work. But what do you have at Trust the Process? Because you mentioned there you can do websites, you can do this, you can do that. So videography. So can someone come to you for one thing, or is it really doesn't work like that? No, actually, just take us through how that would work.
So there's lots of different ways we work with clients. You can come to us for one thing. You come to me and say, I need somebody to manage my social media accounts, for example. We can hire a person to do that. I would typically only hire somebody for 20 hours a week or more. That's just what I find works. Anything less than that, and you don't get the focus of the person. But there's lots of different ways we can work together with somebody. So an example of this is, I love hiring marketing staff for marketing agencies, because marketing agencies know what they're doing, so they do a good job of managing the marketing staff. So if a small business is working with a marketing agency, for example, most marketing agencies will still require an internal champion who does most of the execution, right? Like, they might be developing your content, for example, and your strategy for all of your social accounts. But then they hand all of the stuff off to you, and you log into your accounts and you upload it and you do all that stuff. You use a schedule or whatever. If you have a person offshore who is your sort of marketing assistant, who can work with a marketing agency to then do all of the execution, make sure the emails are going off on time and all that sort of stuff, that to me is kind of like marketing admin. That stuff works amazingly well. So you don't have to be able to afford full-time graphic designer, video editor, etc. If you're using a marketing agency, usually it's great to have an internal resource who can help execute against all that stuff. Like how many people in business are using a marketing agency and they're like, oh, I just never get time to post the things or do the whatever. I keep not responding to them, and so I feel really bad that they're not doing a good job, but it's not because of them, it's because of me. Like having somebody to fill those gaps and do that stuff tends to work really well. But the other way is if anybody who would like to execute some sort of content marketing strategy, particularly B2B businesses, anybody that wants to do this kind of thing that we're doing right now, make video content, make a podcast, make YouTube videos, and then turn it into a whole bunch of content they can use across LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and wherever else, because we can make horizontal, we can make vertical video formats. We do that for clients too. And that is ultimately the whole process of the strategy. What are the topics we're going to talk about? Getting you on a call and capturing all of those things, your brand style guidelines, your tone of voice. We can help work through all of those things, get together once a month, capture a video just like this, send it through to our team who will then watch it all the way through, edit it, cut out all of the really cool pieces, write emails, blogs, social posts for it, and send it all back to you and go, there's all the stuff so that you can go and deliver on it. Which if you were going to do that for yourself, you have to hire a copywriter, a podcast producer, a video editor, a graphic designer, et cetera, right? And so we can do all of those things within that team for you, but just output, here's the content that you're going to use for the next 30 days.
Wow.
Product rather than people, right? It's a service rather than, hire a person. And we work in both ways. Usually the bigger the company is, the more they just want to hire a person because they're already doing stuff and they just need a pair of hands to fill a role that they've already got going. But smaller companies, quite often they need an outcome, they need a service because they absolutely can't afford to have the 6 people required to make great content.
So you could do not just from a podcast and a video like this, but you've got a team if it's a smaller company that could just do content and cut it all up and repurpose, etc., and schedule it, use a scheduler, as you said, or do everything. So
if they're in HubSpot, for example, so we obviously work with companies on HubSpot. If they're in HubSpot, we'll just load it into their HubSpot for them as well.
Right.
Because HubSpot has its own social scheduler. And we've worked, we work with, from consultancies, we work with an ESG consultancy, environmental sustainability and governance for anybody not up with the ESG stuff. And, we work with a client who is an archery skirmish location, right? Like paintball, but with with bows and arrows that have big foam things on the end. Super cool. To make video content for them. So anything, anywhere and in between. But typically the best content for us to make for people is stuff like this. Like if you're an expert-led organization, you've got expertise that you offer, typically service businesses, quite often B2B businesses, where you got a lot to say, you just don't know how to say it, and you don't know then how to package that up in order to make it interesting for people. That's ultimately the best type of client for this, because we'll work through with them, what are their product pillars, what's the model they're going to use to teach their capability, right? How do they get it to land in their customer's head in a really succinct way that you can maybe make a diagram out of? Help them do all that sort of stuff, and then, be able to talk from their expertise. Like you think about like an accountant or something like that who's got so much knowledge and so much to say, they just need to know a good format of how to say it.
So would I be right in thinking then, Ben, when I think of your organisation, I think of the offshoring, right? At the very beginning here, you mentioned the HubSpot as a partner, but now you're talking a little bit more about this other product service that you have, which is for those other companies that don't have a full-time marketing person and can't have the idea of having an offshore person as you said, they're specialists in marketing, they're specialists, the SEO person isn't a person who does social media, for example. But you're saying that you have people on, so would somebody just contact you? Would they email you? Maybe at the end you can explain how they'd get in contact with you to have that conversation. Because I think what I understand is when I see all the different places you're working with and what you're doing, if I was being honest, if I thought about those places, it wouldn't enter my head that somebody offered a service like you offer. I'd have to think, oh, I need a marketing person. And then, you get frustrated because obviously, as you've just said, they're not everything to everybody.
Yep.
So
you get them and you realize they're really good with websites, but they have no idea about content marketing.
Of course. And why would they? That's right. So you're saying there's a service that you do where you can take that, you could be that source, be it website, be it social, be it.
Yep, we do websites too. Anyone wants to talk to us about anything marketing, we will either have a service or we can provide people for it.
Yes.
Actually, we work with, we've got a very close partner that we work with. To me, it's like everything comes back to the start of the process, right? You have to trust the process. And the process ultimately is, first and foremost, do you have a plan, right? Do you have a strategy? Because if you don't have a marketing strategy, well, then what are you executing against? And so we actually also have a partner that we work very closely with where if one of our clients, like there's no point in us making content for them if they have no strategy that is the point of the content in the first place. So we have a partner that we work very closely with where they will help our client to generate their strategy and their processes, go through a sort of 6 to 8 week program where at the end of it, they know what they're going to be doing and they know how they're going to be doing it, so that we can then either go ahead and do content for them or for a lot of the things, hire somebody offshore to execute against the strategy.
Great. Then how many times a day do you say, trust the process? Just like in the sentence, just trust the process. How many times a day do you think you say that sentence?
Well, given that I talk about us a lot, it's probably in the, I don't know. If I were to guess, I would actually say it's probably about 15 to 20. If I was going to, go with some hyperbole, I'd say hundreds and hundreds.
But, and I mean not the company trust the process, but you just say because at least 3 times through this, you just go, trust the process. There's got to be a process. You've got to start with the plan. You've got to trust the process. There's no point executing if there's no plan. You've got to trust the process. I reckon you probably say it a lot more than that. I just speak to your wife.
You're probably right.
Find out how many times you actually say that at home.
It's subconscious now.
Don't even know. That's really great for you to share, Ben. I had some other things. You know what? Let's talk about what's topical right now, which we haven't covered before. Yeah, let's do it. AI in sales. Thoughts?
It's a big topic, right? And so for me, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this too. I think that in a lot of cases, people that aren't using it are very polarized. They either think that it's going to be able to do everything or they think that it's completely useless. For anybody who's actually using, I think there's lots of really interesting applications, particularly where you can speed your process up. So I'll give you an example of this. The most simple one, the biggest brand name in the world of AI for businesses at the moment, the Chat GPT. It's really good for some things, like we use it in our sales process because one of the things that we do for people when they come to us is we help them to organize their thoughts around what is the job. And so in order to do that, we write position descriptions for them. Okay, and so we can take, a few bullet points. What's the job you want to do? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we go into ChatGPT and we say, write a position description for this job title where these 5 things are the primary points. Bang, done. Put it into a format and send it back to the client. And now they have something that, I think position descriptions are a fundamental part of hiring. You have to know what it is, what the job is that you're hiring for. You have to be able to explain that to the person who's taking the job in order to have expectations of what their the output's going to be. So, what we were doing, 12 months ago was we would do a call with somebody, take all of our notes, go away, write a position description, come back together, share the position description and go through it and agree. Now, while we're having a conversation, we can just go tap, 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 boom. Here's the position description. Tell me what parts you need to change. So we can massively shorten the sales process while still providing that really essential component that is important for clients. Whether they hire through us or not, they can use that position description for the role that they're going to hire wherever they go. So that's an example where I think it can be super helpful. I definitely think there's a lot of people trying to use AI to replace human connection and things that real humans should do. And so one of the things we've talked about a lot at Trust the Process is that technology and digitization should add to the human experience, not replace it. It's really because we are ultimately a business of people. That is our product and our service is people. There's a lot of these examples where, for example, in the sales process, we might try and respond for a part of a nurture sequence using something written by AI in the moment based on whatever response we've got from the client. And I've seen some of those examples, and I've certainly seen a lot where people are putting forward that it works really well. Look at this amazing example written. But a lot of those automations misfire or miss the mark far more often than they hit it. And I would say in many cases do more damage than they do good. Yeah. Like the second you try and personalize or automate personalization or automate connection and you get it wrong, the detrimental effect is very, very strong. As soon as somebody knows that's not a real person, it's a bot pretending to be a person, the pushback becomes pretty serious. So for me, there's lots of ways people are trying to use it that I think are relatively dangerous and ineffective. But there's also ways where, if we need something to be created faster that human eyes can then look over and make some edits and fix a little bit, like the example of a position description, I think it can be massively beneficial. Massively decrease the man hours required in order to do some of those things and speed up the process so the customer gets to where they want to be faster, where there's no value to them to go slower. It doesn't help them to have 3 days in between before they get their position description, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I was going to ask, just back at you for a second. Do you think it's different depending on who the customer is? For example, we've got a lot of younger generation here that expect it to be a bot, want instant because they're used to instant. I mean, TikTok's 3 seconds now, right? They want instant, and they don't get maybe as frustrated as I do, or oh, no, that's not the question that I asked. And that little bit of my first reaction to most things, if I'm online and it's a chat, it's speak to so-and-so. And they tell you it's a bot and it's fine. And if it's a simple question, it's fine. But they're just trying to find something on luggage, and it took me an hour and a half. And I just thought, I just want to speak to somebody. I've got 3 guitars and I want to know I'm going to be charged for those 3 guitars. Well, after an hour and a half, I couldn't work out if I was being charged for those 3 guitars. And it's just but of course I then went on hold to the airline, and that took 45 minutes to get through because they're trying to lift everyone to there, right? But I thought that also, Ben, is down to something really important, which is even ChatGPT, whatever, it's only as good as the way you ask the question, right? Mm-hmm. And I believe that younger people are so native to this. Even my 12-year-old, the way they write questions and ask it is far superior. It takes some thinking in my behalf to word something in a certain way to get the outcome where already they are used to wording it. So they get instant outcomes that are far superior to me, which just takes me another step, another few seconds to think about how to word it differently. So maybe they're not expecting human connection. And let's face it, some of the very younger people don't want to have human connection. Mm-hmm. They don't want to have to make a phone call or actually connect with a human being. Surely it's electronic and it can tell me straight away. Look,
So
I think it's. Oh,
I was just going to say, so chatbots, I think, is a great example where the technology has got to, if they're programmed even reasonably well, you know, they have access to the right information, they can be hugely beneficial, right?
yeah.
Chatbots to me are one of the ultimate hacks, right? You know, that conversation we had earlier about speed to response, like somebody fills in a form, goes into a system, there's like 3-4 steps before they actually speak to somebody and get an answer, whereas chat is instant and immediate. So your response time is 0 seconds rather than how many hours has it been since that inquiry came in. And most of the technology for chatbots now is the AI technology for chatbots is pretty good. You can go really far, and probably for most companies, if you invest in it, you can probably do 85% of your inquiries can be answered by a chatbot. For a lot, it's probably higher. For some more complicated type inquiries, it's less. But I mean, like if you're like if you're like a B2B product business, for example, and you've got 10,000 freaking SKUs of bits and pieces that you got to sell to different companies, and you're using a good B2B e-commerce site with a good chatbot with, you know, that's using AI, somebody asks, what are the specifications of SKU 0047598? You can have them set up to be able to answer so much and go so far for you. But I think your point around like expectation really matters. The stuff I'm talking about that I don't think works is where we're trying to pass off a robotic process for a human interaction. We're trying to replace real human connection and somebody feeling like the process is personalized to them through automations. And that to me is where people are getting it wrong with automation. They're getting it wrong with robotic process automation. They're getting it wrong with AI. But actually chatbots, a lot of that is really, really good. And I think if you have a high volume of inquiries coming to your website, it's probably something very much worth investing in. You know, we're not using AI on our chatbot. If anyone goes to ttprocess.co, clicks on the chatbot in the bottom right-hand corner, that is a basic HubSpot chatbot. And the first 4 steps are automated. First 5 steps maybe are automated. And then essentially it is a conversion to qualification and booking with a real person. So once it's qualified of they need this answer, it's not an answer we're going to provide here. For example, they want pricing for offshore staff. It's not something we're going to give from our chatbot because it is highly dependent on the individual tasks of the role, and someone's not going to sit there and click 4,000 inputs in order to get that price. Yeah. So we need to remove them from the chat and into a conversation. So to summarize that, if you've got a high volume going to your website, and you can use chat and you can enable it with AI, you can go really far with it. It's not cheap to get that stuff right, but it's super, super powerful. And that's probably one of the areas I would say bigger businesses should absolutely have invested a lot of money into, and some smaller really will probably do well to do as well. But just don't try to use AI to pretend to be a human.
Yes.
That's the part where people just get turned off by it.
Well, the whole point, you say trust the process. You're about trusting. We're about teaching people that you should be the trusted advisor, not just be it, but you need to live and breathe being the trusted advisor. Some good things that I've seen. We partner with John Yeo from TEDx Melbourne. He's that licensee holder. He's been the licensee holder for 14 years. A great tech head. You know, when he took over that license, he had access to all the videos, and he was able to basically look at the data and see when people would, on a TEDx talk, he could see the data when someone would pause, rewind, or abandon a video. And he went back 30 seconds and worked out what they were doing. And so he created this formula, and he's one of our, what we call our partner trainers, which means he has his own business. But what we've done in the last year is get people that are real pillars of expertise, like you said about the marketing thing, and call them in to work with us. So we've got the same for business development, negotiation, people that have been GMs of businesses for 40 years of different businesses, and they just are absolute key experts in that area. And he does it for advanced communications for, if you're at a conference or whether it's a corridor conversation, and he uses that data of how to keep attention and to help keep people engaged and how to influence, right? Love this guy. He's really personable. And he'll be the first to say that he's quite introverted and found it quite exhausting at the beginning to do speaking things, but he's just very articulate and kind, warm person that you can learn off. You know, we have live events with him all the time. And the reason I mention him is because he posted that on LinkedIn, which I immediately jumped on and reposted. And now we have it as a blog on our website. And it's, and asked him how much time it saved him. So it's basically, he's reading, it's got the two pictures, and one picture is his eyes actually reading the script down here. And it's 19 seconds long. The whole thing goes, hi, da-da-da-da-da, from AI. I'm actually reading the script, da-da-da. And the other picture is him, but with the eye painted in. Now, that's one of many, many things out there, right? But I have to say, you wouldn't know. And so he's saying, and at no point during this have I actually looked at the camera once. So I had to get him, I said to him, how long did that take to do? Now, normally when I ask anybody, when they, and you know this, when they provide a 20-second promo or something, or a 30-second promo or a minute promo, you know, people just think they've just done it and they've just uploaded it, right? And often it takes people 2 or 3 hours. They retake, the lighting, retake, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, I think he said it took him, it was like under 5 minutes. So because he could just do it like that, that's it. So that actually means if he's pushed for time, or if any of us are pushed for time, and we have that software and we have to just share with a member of the team in another country, or with your own team, or with a client, and you want to say, I'll say, hi, Ben, lovely chat the other day, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You could sort of get away with it for the short little video because it means you haven't got to retake and retake and retake and retake. Yeah. And it's just one of those things that's like, you know, it's time saving, it's effective, you wouldn't know, and who cares? He just wanted to get across this particular sentence, and does it matter? I mean, with Loom, we mentioned Loom earlier, right? I'm completely obsessed with Loom. And I record things for the team over the weekend as I see things, and I record them for the team. And sometimes I have to re-record it, you know, and re-record it, record over it. And then I'm like, by the time I have the 5th version, I'm like, you know, I'm completely like exhausted, and it comes across. I don't know, kids walked in the kitchen or something, I happen to be doing it from home or something like that. But that makes me think, actually, using those sort of things, you can use all these things just to make life so much easier and to shorten the distance of your time and be more effective and efficient. And I've seen many things out there, but I think the chat box is a brilliant one. I mean, it's been around for a long, long time. And, you know, the chat GDP, I mean, I used that. I had a client around the other day and picked something up. They'd left something at a workshop and they came around and picked it up. And I've worked with him for about 8 years. And he came around and he works in particular in construction. And he's a business owner. And he said, I don't know if there's anything on that I can do. And I said, you know, how about we have a 500-word blog about the top 5 questions people are asked when it comes to, I'll just insert plumbing for now for the sake of it, home plumbing. And I just like that. And I said, come over here and make a cup of tea. He said, what's going on? I said, well, it's finished. Haven't got the kettle on yet. And he walked back and his eyeballs, it was a wonderful moment, like watching somebody go, what on earth has just happened? I said, look, it won't help your Google algorithm, etc. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but at least you've got something very quickly. And I mean, I use it to collect research, right? So if I want to go, let's just say I do a leadership blog on how to read your team effectively or something or other for leaders or sales teams, right? Maybe it's very specific. I often want to find some research to back that. And that's where I use it. I'll go on and I'll say any research to do with, you know, this particular subject, Harvard research or something like that, please, you know, Please. I even say, see, my son sometimes goes, does he please? What are you saying please for? So that's what I mean about having to write it in properly. But they'll actually say, yeah, and then up it comes, it could be a 500-word block. I'm not going to use that block. The tone isn't me. Even when I put in my tone, the tone isn't me. Even when I put in English language, it's never English language, it's American language. So I find that I can't use any of the blog except for the clippets off at the moment I can't, but that's down to many factors, right, Ben?
Yeah.
But the clips of Harvard research study paper,
Yep.
I clip that out, I clip that out, I clip that out, and I'm got, right, is that relevant enough? If it isn't, what did I input to get that? But that has speeded up my blogs,
Yes.
because now I can pull that data in without sitting there and looking up. And frankly, after 10 minutes of looking up, I think, oh, forget it, I'll just run the blog without that research.
Yeah.
And now I've got, bang, is there any research on this? Personality types, any research on this to do with this particular, do extroverts make better salespeople? Do introverts make better and I put research, bang, go off and make a cup of tea. So I make a cup of tea, I just go and do something, come back like 35 seconds later, and it's there. So I think there's lots. Anything else, AI in marketing? I mean, that chat box I'd say is marketing, but anything else in marketing that jumps to your...
Oh, for sure. I mean, copywriting as like a first point, start the copy and then have somebody edit is super helpful. Actually, I do find it really helps with things like just annoying creative processes. An example is I need to come up with a name for a webinar, right? And you're like, oh, what should I call that webinar? And so one of the things I like to do is ask, I don't know if you've noticed this with ChatGPT, you can get it to do things in the style of someone or of another business.
Yeah.
Because, like for example, with webinars, I just think I want to write a name for a webinar like HubSpot would, right? Because they're really good at stuff like that. And so I can be like, give me 10 ideas for webinar names that are about XYZ in sales in the style of HubSpot, right? And so it'll give me like mastering the art of sales prospecting, strategies and tools, the ultimate sales playbook, creating a winning sales strategy. I literally did this while we were talking, by the way. But the two things for me are the in the style of and give me 10. Because if I say give me 1, I never get what I want. I'm always like, give me 10, give me 15, give me 20, and it'll just go brrr.
You're greedy. You're greedy is what you're saying.
And then I pick pieces from multiple different options and mash them together and I get what I want. Yeah. That usually means that, because I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but you go into a meeting and everyone's like, what should we call that thing? And it's like, oh, we'll figure it out later. And then a week later, no one's figured it out. It shortcuts that whole thing. And I'm like, all right, there's the name. We're done.
Yeah.
Well, I like it for stuff like that.
That's a great one. Yeah. Headings for, openings for.
Yeah.
The other day,
titles for, subject lines, all that stuff. Yeah.
Response to, we did something, and Mark in here put in answers to this email, actually. Different ways to answer this email in a positive, upbeat, something or other. I think it's endless, the possibilities. So that's AI marketing. That's AI marketing for copywriting and to tidy that up. What about, there's one thing we haven't discussed yet, Ben, which was you talked about marketing and sales with your offshoring, but you didn't talk about servicing. I need to loop back to that. What about AI in... sorry, forget the AI. The conversation that has been hot topic for me this week, it's like I'm a magnet for this conversation, is getting people back to the office. So all I'm hearing from people is the team are, well, one, the leaders don't know, which is why it's down to trust the process if something goes offshore, right? One, because I speak to people about their development pathway for their teams, where the teams are at, what conversations they're having, where the stretch is, etc. And of course, now people go generally, I don't know. what conversations they're having. All I know is we're converting 10%, 30%, 9%, whatever. And I don't know if it should be 20% higher because I'm not there having the conversations. And, if they do turn up, the reps on their best behaviour and doing everything squeaky clean, but they're getting fatigued and it's almost like it's wearing thin. And a client said to me yesterday that they had read an article where, had they either read an article, it was a client that they were dealing with. It's going to come to me. It was a big bank. It was a bank because the type of client that I was working with, and they had decided to bring everone back in the office.
I was having with Zoom. Zoom just brought everyone back to the office.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So they said one part of it was they were saving money, no need to have a big office anymore in the city, look at their head count, we're saving money here because they were having small offices. But now they're like, they need to have like an anchor day, they're calling things, or a whatever day. And it's, that ticks off mental health, that ticks off collaboration, it ticks off hundreds and hundreds of things. It ticks off skill set, it ticks off sharing information with each other, lifting everybody else's game up. But I've heard that in every meeting I've had, they've said, okay, and this is to do with core teams, not like what you're dealing with, which is offshore. They should be part of the team, Zoom them in, etc. They're definitely part of the team, collaborating. But yeah, what are the team? What's the word I'm looking for? Not that's just the skill level, not morale, but the team. Well, they're less efficient now, and so they're finding they're all pulling them back in.
I think this is it's one of the big topics of right now, because we're seeing lots of companies starting to push their teams to come back into the office. We've been seeing it for a long time. Personally, I find it hard working from home all the time, right? Purely solo from home. I have proactively, we have 0 offices around, in our HQ countries around the world. And so we don't have a place to go. We have some office space and things like that in the city, but some meeting room type stuff. But I've found recently that I go into the city to do meetings and stuff and work from other people's offices. We've got a couple of close contacts that we do a lot of stuff with, where they've got spare desks, and I'll go into the city and work from their office for a day because I miss it. So we know for sure that there's a lot of burnout out there. There's the workforce, the population at large is, more depressed, less connected, et cetera, than they've ever been. And it's a problem. And so, a lot of companies are pointing at they're less efficient, they're less effective because they're at home, so we need to bring them in. I don't think that's what is happening. I think what's happening is that the world at large has become far more digital and far less connected. And so whilst bringing people back into an office might actually be a good solution, if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, it won't be, because people who are monitored closely and micromanaged and whatever else in an office are going to hate their job anyway. So you're probably not going to get the result that you were looking for. And so for me, it's like, what is the actual problem and what actually solves that, right? Connection, growth, being a part of something bigger than yourself, service, self-actualization, being the doing the best that you can do, being put in positions to do what you're good at and succeed. All of those things are actually, in reality, what create happiness. Having, the occasional yoga session for the sake of ticking a box doesn't solve the problem, right? So look, trust the process. We've literally just recently redone our vision, mission, values, actually, funnily enough, around this topic. We don't want the world to become more and more and more digital. We actually want to pivot back the other way, and we want to say that whilst we will absolutely be a digitally enabled business that uses technology and uses automation, all of those sort of things to improve the efficiency of our business and the business of our clients, we want to be far more connected, right? We want to get together and we want to have dinners and we want to do events and we want to have fun and we want to be a really fun organization to work with that actually goes against this whole disconnected way that the world has gone. And so I think as far as like the whole coming back to the office thing, I know some companies that have brought their teams back to the office because their teams asked for it, right? And they've remained really flexible about it. But there is a really important fundamental human question, which is, do people know what makes them happy, right? Because what teams ask for and what businesses think they should do, I don't know are also truly aligned with the goal of having happy, engaged employees. People say they're worked too hard, but I think we know from so many studies that actually hard work creates happiness when there is fulfillment to it. So to me, it's like, do we bring them back into the office? Well, that depends. For what purpose, and how are we going to treat them, and how are we going to help them to treat themselves? If people live lives and work in environments that are conducive to being unhappy, then they will be unhappy. And if they live lives and exist in environments and workplaces that are conducive of being happy, then they will be happy. Not all of the time. It's obviously a grey scale. It's constantly changing. But so to me, the question is less about should everyone come back to the office, and what is an environment that creates fulfillment, right? People don't have to, actually, that's probably even better than happiness, because you can't have happiness all of the time. Nobody can have happiness all of the time. It's not a steady state destination. And so what's the work environment that helps people feel fulfilled? And being around other people and being connected to other people is certainly a part of that. And if your team are working from home and nobody ever talks to them and you never do anything fun, then they'll probably be really unhappy at home. Same as if you do that at home. The cheat code at work is that what do people do when they're all together? They go out and they have a few beers after work and they do all those things and they connect on their own, nothing to do with you as the business. So there's probably some benefits to it. I don't think necessarily it's the answer for most companies. I think most companies are going to bring people back to the office. Those people are going to be unhappy. They're going to think it's because they're back at the office, and they're going to move to companies where they don't have to go back to the office, and they're going to continue to be unhappy probably at those companies too. Yeah. So I don't have a good simple answer to it, other than like we just have to focus on being real human beings and connecting with people and caring about them as individuals and holding them accountable. Like the whole just letting people do whatever they want and thinking that that's like how you make them happy is also a huge problem. Like companies being afraid to tell people that they've done the wrong thing and hold them accountable, that doesn't create happiness either.
No, that's right. I've just I just saw an article or watched something, I can't remember where it was, about I'm sorry, I can't quote who said it because I can't remember it. It's to do with children, right? But it made me think just then what you've just said, Ben, that maybe this is translatable, because after all, we're just big children, right? That there's 9 minutes a day that are really important to children as a parenting point of view. And I mean, this caught my attention, right? Because there's a constant guilt as a parent that runs their own business, that the children are always saying, you're always working, So, and it's broken into 3 lots of 3 minutes. So all we've got to do is pull out the bag for 9 minutes a day, Ben, we're right. So the first 3 minutes when they wake up, the 3 minutes when they come in from school, and the 3 minutes before they go to bed. So, if you've got 5 kids, it's going to be a bit tough for you. But and that's interesting to me, because I make a big effort. There's lots of the areas of parenting which I am if there was a scale, I'd be very low on. But I always make an effort when they wake up to welcome them to the day. And it's not for 3 minutes, that's for sure. But I make them feel good about getting up. And I'm not actually there when they're coming from school very often, but if I am, they're grumpy usually, but I make a big thing of that. And then before they go to bed, that's almost the best time of my day because they go to sleep. But I spend time still in all the beds, or two of the beds at least. And we have some time. It's like, there's no distractions, no other children. I'm not working, trying to answer an email and everything else because you're in bed and it's dark. And so in my mind, at some level, I knew that they were important. But I think what you've just said about it's not the office that people are craving. It's not the office that's the answer. It's all the other things you said, which include purpose and connection and inner west. But it's the connection bit. So maybe as leaders, we need to think of the same thing for our team. I'm often in doing a masterclass before the team arrive, or I'm on Zoom before they arrive. And that means I put my head out to go, hi, how are you? How was your weekend? Hold on a minute. And then I go back in and then I do the next thing. And then I put my head out and go, and then I go back in again. And, actually, should I be forming that 3-minute connection where I can just, when they make a coffee, walk up with them, stand there and make a coffee, or stand there and just connect and be present and not, you build it in like a system, like a process. My time for looking at LinkedIn, which I find is, that's a job in itself now, right? So I used to walk to the coffee shop and that was my 4 minutes, 2-minute walk there, wait for the coffee, come back. That was my LinkedIn time every day. And now we've got a person who makes great coffee. I miss that every day, but that was my strategy to do that. Maybe my strategy is now to walk up with them to the coffee or sit with somebody or walk somewhere. And that's that connection time where I'm just present with them. And it's present as they arrive, present maybe over lunch, and then present maybe before they go. That's the same thing. You don't have to feel as though, I'm trying to juggle feelings. But actually, if I can just be really, truly present for pockets, then that actually means the person's heard and listened to and understood. And you've connected, that word you've used, connected, which I think is crucial. You've connected at another level, right? So I think what you've touched on there is really interesting about going back to the office because it really is the buzzword at the moment.
100%. For everybody can think about this. Even in the office, what are the leaders that you loved and what are the leaders that you didn't love? The leaders that you didn't love are probably the ones that arrived in the morning, walked straight past everyone, walked into their office, shut the door, came out occasionally to do a drive-by and drop a bomb on someone's desk. And then, at the end of the week, try and have a few beers with everyone and be like, hey, pizza party. And who are the ones that you love? The ones that would always make time to do a one-to-one with you and spend that time and let you bring your stuff to the table. The ones who would drop by your desk, not to drop work on you, but to take work from you, or to see how you're going with things, see if you need help, see if you need any guidance or advice without having to go and ask for it because they're too busy, right? Like all of those little things, they translate actually whether somebody's in the office or whether they're at home. The check-in itself and the purpose for the check-in and the content of the check-in are really important. One of my favorite things I used to love doing working in an office was I would do one-to-ones with my team every week, but we would never do it in a meeting room. We would go for a walk and do a lap around the block, go and get a coffee, go and get a juice. One of my favorite team members ever had his own juice that he would get from this particular place that was named after him. He could go in and order it by his own name. I'll have my name. I won't say who it is. But if he ever listens to this, he'll know who he is. Actually, everybody else who was around him will know who he is. But that just like not sitting in a meeting room being like, show me your numbers, but that walk around the block. How are you going? What are you working on? What's happening? How's the family? All of the non-work stuff, but all of the work stuff too. And if we ran out of time because we only covered their stuff, that was okay for that particular meeting. If they had nothing else and I had a list of things, then I'd cover the things that were for me. But like all of those bits and pieces I miss massively because they were built-in check-ins where I could really connect with people. It's harder to do when everybody's from home, but it's actually more important to do. You have to do it all the time. You have to check in with them. You have to
Yeah.
talk with them every day, and you have to talk to them about things that aren't just, how's the deadline going? Why aren't you getting the results that I wanted you to get? The burden is higher, work from home, for that stuff, for connection, because they have less of it. They're more reliant on you for it because they're not getting it from their colleagues that would normally drop past their desk and have a chat and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
The burden of leadership is greater.
It is. In fact, I had a colleague that was, what we used to do is we used to sort of video conferencing, whatever it happens to be, Teams or Zoom, to ask about something. And then we'd finish, but we'd leave it on and carry on working. And sometimes it'd be left on for an hour. And it's just,
love that.
we didn't even talk to each other often during it. And it was just because we were so lonely, not having company, that only every 10 minutes we would go, oh, the cat's done this, or, oh, I'm just going to make a cup of tea, but the rest of the time it was just having that person there. And I thought, oh, God, this is really interesting. What we're really craving is not necessarily talking or listening, but also the idea of having energy exchange between people.
Yep.
And, I went to some meetings just in the city, and I have to say it's been a long time since I've had that many meetings back to back because people was, video conferencing now all the time. And something really magical happened in those meetings. That one, the meeting was 10 times longer than it needed to, no, longer than it would have been if it was a call.
Yeah.
And with one client, it was, we just sat there. I've known them for years. We just sat there and just smiled. And no one felt the need to talk. No one felt the need to talk. And they were like, thanks for coming. I was like, that's fine. How you going? And it was a big pace between everything. They're like, lovely to have you here. And just the first 2 or 3 minutes, we were just sort of smiling and just taking in that we were there. And when we hugged, I just felt the hug was different, and I thought, yeah, if this was 2018, would have gone, just like, nice to see you, straight down to business. And we were down to business after that, absolutely. But the first few minutes, maybe 4, was just sort of taking in and being. We were just being and just enjoying. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, this is really wonderful. And when I left, it just felt it was just an energy exchange between people, being around people that are positive and uplifting. And, all leaders want that positive team culture where they're all contributing and accountable and blah, blah, blah. And that was just one of them, just being around, just feeling, being around somebody else. I need to ask you about, we did sales. I'm looping back to something now from earlier on.
Yep.
Right. You said in sales, what would be good? This is back to your business. You said in marketing, but we didn't cover service.
Service, I think, is actually the easiest answer, right? Because ultimately it's about your customers having access to information and having access to people that can help them to get something done, usually. And so for me, the service part is like if you have a high volume of customer inquiries, and that can be product inquiries, it can be service inquiries, but it can be simple things like if you're a cleaning company and you have to do a lot of scheduling, right? Like a person needs to be in a place at a certain time. You're a chiropractor. You've got people coming in at certain times in the calendar throughout the day, and that stuff changes regularly. Well, if you have one person doing that in Australia, for example, right?
It's like a chiropractor or a cleaning company, is it scheduling and you have to move the schedule in?
Yeah, so like if a customer calls in and they need to move what time they're going to be there or you're going to be at their place, and you've got one person available to you in Australia and that person's already on a call, well, what happens to that customer? Right? That customer doesn't get answered. They potentially now are worried and you've created stress in their life, and now they're going to call back again and maybe they get through. but they're getting through and they're already at a higher effort level and they're maybe a little bit more on edge. And then they say, I need to move the schedule to Wednesday at 3 p.m. I'm sorry, we don't have anybody available at that time. Because of the headspace that they're in, they're far more likely to have more problems with that and push back on it, and etc. So in a role like service, particularly for things like scheduling, for inquiries that people are going to make, like let's say, for example, on delivery times for something, if the role itself is significantly improved through availability, right? If the customer service is improved through availability, then most of the time you're going to be better off having 3 people in the Philippines versus 1 in Australia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so anything like that from a service perspective where the inquiries are relatively easy, the scheduling is relatively easy, all of the information doesn't require a massively technical knowledge of the particular thing. And look, you can get people that can do that stuff. Let's say, for example, you need to provide some sort of like IT help desk, right? You can get far more qualified people for far less money in the Philippines than you can in Australia. But wherever the thing from a service perspective is going to be improved, your customer service is going to be improved through volume, having more people available more of the time, maybe even through night shifts. That's where, to me, service is massively valuable to offshore, because now my customers get the information that they need and they get the help and the service that they need when they need it. I'm easy to deal with because I have those people, right? And that comes down to the customer's ease of use, right? You know, this whole idea of customer experience being about delighting people. I've got to have amazing experiences, et cetera, et cetera. Any of that stuff only matters if you're not a pain in the ass to deal with. As soon as it's difficult to do business with you, then all of the extra delighting and the presents and the nice messages and the whatever, all that stuff goes out the window as soon as they've got to call you back 5 times in order to reschedule their massage, right?
Yeah. Are you making it easy for the customer? That's one of our big mottos, actually, because I feel people make it really hard for the customer to buy off them half the time.
Yes.
I mean, nobody would actually admit that necessarily, but often I just go, people make it really hard to buy. Even today I got an email from somebody who said, have you managed to watch my video yet? And I thought, well, if you're really clever, you'd have just forwarded the same email, wouldn't you, with the video underneath, to save me having to come out of this email and now to search you up and look, little things like that. There's always little things, you know, that you think, are you making it easy for a customer to buy of you? And I totally agree. I don't think people have to delight. When I want a service or something, I don't want to be delighted. I just want to have it. And yeah, if you go above and beyond and it's natural and it has integrity and authenticity and it's excellent customer service because it's come from the heart, brilliant. But if you can't do A and B first, I don't really care about how.
Don't care about anything else until that's done.
Yeah. So on the note then of a question of maybe you got an offshore team, you're taking a team member on, you're having them as part of your team. We just talked about that, so make sure they feel like part of the team and connecting with them and have them in team meetings, I guess, and things like that. I know you may spoke before, but this is a member of your team, you know, this member of your team needs to be included with everything on your team. I guess one thing to ask would be, what level of control would a business have over having somebody that's not here? I mean, what is it?
Yeah.
Does it even matter to people anymore if they're already used to a team that's remote? Isn't this just the same? Like, why would people even be worried about that, I wonder? Because that was a question that came up before, and that people sometimes ask what level of control they can have. But if your team already remote, then what difference does it make where they are?
Yeah, I think the question is the same no matter what country they're in. You know, there's certainly a lot of people that have more concerns, and they shouldn't really, but they have more concerns with an offshore team than they do with an onshore team, whether you know, when both are remote. And some of that is, you know, like if you have team members in, let's say, a less economically developed country, people will have concerns about security and safety and all of those sorts of things, and they're all really important things to work through. But actually the whole like control aspect for remote teams versus in office, I actually think that it's false. So,
Yeah, I
it's the
agree.
same problem. Okay, so I'm a team leader of some sorts and I'm sitting in an office and I can see all of my team. That team, me having control over that team, is nothing to do with their location, right? Because I'm not sitting there looking over their shoulder at their screen. People are going to do what they're going to do, whether they're there or whether they're somewhere else. They're going to find ways to mess around and not do the work, etc. Whether they're in an office or whether they're remote, the control that I have by them being in the office is, to me, a bit of a fallacy. Ultimately, control is, and this is something that one of our founders, and this is, I believe, a very military saying, control is consistency plus visibility, right? Consistency of process plus visibility of the inputs. So anybody that wants to have control, whether their team is in an office with them, whether their team is out in the field, whether their team is in the Philippines, whether their team is in Nigeria, in all of those scenarios, control is ultimately about, do I have visibility over a consistent process? And so the way that we give that to most of our clients is usually through a CRM, right? We are HubSpot agency partners. We help people implement and develop HubSpot in their business. We do ActiveCampaign as well. We use HubSpot for ourselves, because when the process is being expressed into a system like HubSpot, into a technology where now the process has visibility, because I can see, for example, in sales, I can see where are each of my leads at in the pipeline at what stage and what's happened with them, how many phone calls, what was the content of the phone call, because I can record all of the calls, what emails have we sent to them, and what was the content of the emails, when did they happen, when was the last time we reached out to them, etc., etc. How many times have they been onto our website this month? Right, all of that stuff, and we're following a consistent process and we can see it. That's what control actually is. And so whether I'm sat in an office or whether all my team are sat at home, if I have a great fundamental platform like HubSpot that I manage my business through with a good, single source of truth as far as what's happening with each individual client, then I have control no matter where they are. And I have visibility, not just of the inputs for the process, but I have visibility over efforts and quality and all of that sort of stuff. And when, if all of your customer interactions are done in individual people's emails, if that customer calls in, how the heck do you know what's going on with them? How do you have any control whatsoever over what's happening? And so that's the moment where in the office I go, hey, who's been talking to Charmaine? And someone who just doesn't happen to be at lunch goes, oh, it was me, right? Whereas if you have a great foundational system for your business to run on, where everybody's emails are connected, everybody's phones are connected, right? Your website speaks to your CRM, your marketing automation speaks to your CRM, your service is done through your CRM, you can raise tickets and manage. The customer's called in and they have a problem, the thing on their whatever has broken and we've got to replace it, and having a ticket to be able to track whether that has actually been completed and resolved, being able to do all of those things with a single source of truth for the customers just means that you have control. You can inspect, and that is honestly where, whether you're at home or in the office, where I think a lot of businesses fall down is that they don't actually go and inspect. They have the illusion of control because they can see the people.
Yes.
They don't actually go and on this podcast a few months ago, a good friend of mine, Emily McLeod, said, inspect what you expect, right? And that to me is where you get the control from. Have the fundamental platform where everything happens within it and you get the single source of the truth, and then just go looking, right? Don't get too obsessed with dashboards and reports. Super important, don't get me wrong, data is super important, but just go into some deals and do some quality assurance and some
Yeah.
quality checking. Listen to calls, check emails. Why are we saying this at this time? What is
Yeah.
that email? That makes absolutely no sense. Oh, look, this automation is fired and this client has received an email about onboarding at a time when they told us that they're canceling, right? Like, go and inspect what's happening, because now you can. And if you're doing that, if you've got a platform and you go and inspect it, now you've got control. It doesn't matter whether your team are at home or in the office.
It's a wonderful wrap for every element that you do. The only thing I was going to add is, I can hear all these automations and everything, and I think this is fantastic, right? I'm going to also add, your salespeople then need to know how to connect properly. They need to know, because otherwise they can become, if you ever do extended discs and stuff, the high SCs, they become very task focused and not really present and engaging with a client, because they end up being taught the system almost before they get taught the outcome and the client problem from the beginning. We have a big onboarding here, and when we go to the clients and we help them with leaders, we go, when a new rep starts, before you pull them in the office and open their head up and say, how about you take them to success stories? Joe Smith was his chops up the street, did this, then this happened, this is how. So they're lifted by what they're selling, the purpose word that you came back to, what's their purpose, right? And then you go back in the journey. Well, actually, we met them 3 years ago at a conference, then this happened, then we added value, then we were helpful, and then we invited them to this masterclass or whatever, then this happened, and then the consequence of that was this, and the sale is always the consequence of, all the right behaviours at the beginning, and the behaviours and actions are a consequence of how you think as a rep and how you decide your intent is to engage and understand, and therefore it's more listening than talking. So to me, I love the fact that when you're out to your construction company recently, a lot of it was coaching and training as well, because you need to have the sales team know how to, you've got all this great leads coming in, you've got offshore people, qualifying them, and they need to then be able to convert them by understanding how to actually sell effectively. And how to sell in 2023, 24 is very different to 3 years ago, let alone 8 years ago.
So different. Yeah, so different.
I'm getting many more. What's been wonderful, I'm getting many more leaders come on our courses. There's always been leaders in their teams, but I'd say probably out of every 3, 2 leaders might come, and then 1 would go, oh, just my team. And you said something earlier, and I made a note of it. A key element of how do they know what looks good? How can you help your team member if you don't know? How do you coach them if you don't know what looks good? And I wrote that down because it's like, I'm going to steal that immediately, because I'm often saying to leaders, well, you sort of need to know how to sell yourself. Because when you're selling to your team and you're influencing and you're speaking to clients, but your team are looking up at you at how you're engaging. And if you haven't been trained professionally by a good organisation the last 3 years, you're probably a few steps behind your competitor. And however great you are, you could be at 200%, I don't care, but you could actually be with a few skills at 700% over your target. Like literally, Tiger Woods is having coaching for 10 hours a day, I'm sure. So we can all refine and develop and sharpen our toolbox, as it were. So I think along with those processes, making sure people know how to use them and come back to that connection with a client, the ones that need connection when it's not just automated. Any passing, not passing thoughts, is there anything else that you feel, Ben, that you'd be asked normally? If you were sitting here, Ben, asking Ben, what would you ask?
Well, I can tell you that what I'm being asked a lot at the moment is generally about like growing a business during economic turmoil, let's call it.
Go. No. Thoughts?
Yeah. Look, I feel very fortunate that some key years of my development as a salesperson happened during the GFC, right? This is not my first rodeo. And some of the key lessons that I learned then I think are really valuable right now, and, were really valuable during COVID. And these things are going to repeat themselves over and over again. And the reality of trying to grow a business during a downturn, right, a time when everybody is feeling some sort of economic pinch, and it has definitely gotten tougher. I think in Australia we're probably a little bit behind some other parts of the world, and we're probably still got some of the worst ahead of us. Some of the most important things are that you have to stay aware that somebody's going to win, right? People don't stop spending entirely, but they stop spending on things that they don't see value in, right? What's the first thing everybody does when there's a cash crunch in a business? They go and they look at all of the various tech platforms and subscription services and all of those things, and they go, which ones are we using and which ones are we not? And they cancel off. Like, if you think of every provider as if you are one of those subscriptions, which ones are they going to cancel? Which ones are they not? Right? You've got to find a way to be one of the ones that they're not going to, because you are fundamentally essential to their business, fundamentally essential to their life, and adding enough value. The second thing is like that's just, how are we going to keep them? And in some cases, you need to really think about, things like, could we offer discounts for payments in full? Pay us for the next 12 months, charge less. Sign up for another 12 months, charge less. Like, all of that sort of, how are we going to secure our existing revenue source and our existing customer base? The second thing for me is, how are we going to decrease our costs, right? And this, to me, is not a purely cost-saving measure. It's looking at your business and realizing where the fat is, right? We talked before about, or I mentioned before about, growth sucks cash.
Yeah.
And if you go and have a look at most businesses, I would say there is fairly significant problems with resource allocation, right? Spending lots of money on some low-value tasks. And this is a really important conversation for us in the world of offshoring, because the business owner or the MD or the CEO who's spending a bunch of time in administrative tasks is not potentially spending a lot of time building marketing partnerships or closing deals or any of these other things. And if there's, 8 hours a week that someone can remove from their calendar in low value tasks you could pay somebody $10 an hour to do, not in Australia, but offshore you could, then shifting those things elsewhere, reprioritizing time, reprioritizing resource allocation. If somebody is a founder, an MD, director level above, whatever, and they look at the task that they're doing and they wouldn't pay somebody $70, $80, $90 an hour to do that task if they hired them, they have to stop doing it. Right? They have to stop doing it, and they have to delegate it to somebody that is a task appropriate resource and cost, right? That's probably number 2. How do we make sure in our business, in our balance sheet, all of the resources that we're spending are appropriate to the tasks that they're achieving?
Yeah.
The third thing for me is, like, how are we going to win more business in the new environment, in this current environment? And to me, sometimes that is in product development. How do we adjust our product, build a new product, etc., that still fits within our realm of expertise and genius? It still is what our clients know us for. We're not like, going from a marketing agency to selling people air conditioners. It's still within our realm. Or most of the time, it's just, how do we need to talk about our product and the solution of our product so that it fits a current need, right? What people are focusing on and what they care about and what they perceive to be their greatest problems will be the things that they're interested in solving and spending money on. And so an example of this for me is, I talked about selling during the GFC. Right at the back end of the GFC, I was selling sponsorship on conferences, right? Selling sponsorship on conferences. And when we were selling to marketing managers, right? Marketing managers, marketing directors, all the questions are around like, how many new names am I going to get for the database? How many leads can I generate? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the types of conferences that we were running were paid. They were paid for by the attendee as well as by the sponsor. And so we didn't get huge volumes of people to our conferences, right? We literally changed nothing in how we delivered and developed conferences. But the way that we delivered and developed conferences was we would go to the market and we would find out what are the three biggest challenges in that particular industry at that time. And that could be in banking and finance. It could be like micro stuff like drill and blast in mining. What are the three biggest problems that they're having? And we would build a conference around that, and we would charge $2,500, $3,500 to attend that event. And so we shifted the way we sold sponsorship, where we would sell sponsorship to sales directors who still needed pipeline and to make deals. And we focused on the fact that the people that attended our conference paid to be there to solve the problems that the conference was about, which they also solved, right? And so our whole value prop was, do you want to talk to everybody? Do you want just net new names in the database? Or do you just want to be able to cut through the market where nobody's buying and just find the people who are actively spending money to solve these three problems? Well, sales directors, for the most part, don't want to talk to 50 people in order to find one. They don't want to go to a 10,000 person event or a 1,000 person event to find 3 or 4 people. And so what we were doing and the way we positioned it was there might only be 40 people there, but all 40 of those people have spent $3,000 in order to find solutions to these 3 problems. And so that was just changing the value proposition, changing the angle, changing maybe who in the organization we targeted. And, 2008, 2009, 2010, we had massive growth, massive growth in sponsorship sales. By the way, massive decline in attendee sales, massive decline in attendee sales, but massive growth in sponsorship sales. And so a business that really should have massively tanked managed to stay pretty much flat across the GFC because of that change in strategy. So I would say, think about what you're selling to your customers and how you're selling to your customers and how you position it, and apply it to what's happening in their world, right? What are they feeling? What are they stressing out about? How do we position it to solve that problem? That's probably the major things, right? I would add one more, which is that whatever your customers are feeling and whatever's happening in your market, your team are probably feeling and thinking it too. They are probably worried about their own job. They are probably worried about their own mortgage repayments and all of those sorts of things. We are, for the first time in 3 or 4 years, in a position where there's more candidates for the jobs than there has been. And it's a bit easier to hire. That's flipped back the other way a little bit, which is good for the employers, less so for the employees. And so you can hold people a bit more accountable. But people love challenge. Actually, people love being a part of resolving and overcoming a challenge. Some of my favorite stories and memories of being a salesperson are from that time at the back end of the GFC, or, selling business education, which is absolutely, something people can choose to do or not to do in the middle of COVID. I loved those times, and I can guarantee that the teams loved those times too. I still talk to people from back in those GFC days, good friends of mine, right? We talk about those times as being really formative for us because they were challenging, and people want to rise to the challenge. Like, don't assume that they are weak. Assume that your people have the strength and have the capability, and they want to rise to the challenge, and don't try and shield it from them. Don't lie to them and tell them that everything's okay and then turn around and fire 15 people.
That's
tell
right.
them what's going on and give them the chance, give them the respect to step up and fix the problem and help you fix the problem.
Resilience is probably quite a key word that needs to be bandied around now. Having some resilience and
100%. But how does
empathy with
everyone
your
get this
team.
friggin' wrong? Why does everybody seem to get resilience wrong, right?
Yeah.
What so many businesses are calling resilience now is people don't like to be surprised by the challenge, right? They don't like to be hidden from it. They don't like to be treated like children from it. They want to know what problems there are and they want to help to resolve them and they want to work to resolve them. And if they have the information and if they have the clarity over what the mission is and where they're going, most of the time, and look, some people absolutely won't rise to the occasion, but people that are bought in to trying to help work through something difficult will have resilience because they're prepared for it. It's not all of a sudden everything's rosy and now all of a sudden I have all of this extra work and half of my colleagues are gone.
Yeah.
And now everyone's telling me I need to be resilient. Oh, now we've got resiliency training. We've got a consultant coming in to do resiliency training because we shouldn't feel so bad about the fact that nobody saw coming that you fired 15 of my colleagues. Like,
Yeah.
you want people to be resilient, just don't be an arsehole.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got a little bit excited
Hashtag Ben. Not sure you can put that particular line out really in a little box bot. I don't know if you can say that.
What do you think? What do you think about this resiliency stuff? Like, for sure, it's harder to be resilient now.
Everyone's different. If you've got 8 kids, they're working from home, things are happening, you've got mortgage payments, you can't put my feet in somebody's shoes that's got a different environment to me. I think, and I think everything is, our key motto is observe and adapt to people around you, observe and adapt to clients, and you can't, and stop assuming, stop projecting, stop assuming. I think you've covered it. Management needs to be open and honest, but be able to deliver it in a factual, not necessarily sandwich approach, but this is the vision for the company. We are doing what we can to keep this happening. This is what's going to happen. And people say, will there be redundancy? So yes, there might be. And that person, we will know when you will know, like we're working on reducing, making that happen because we want to have a solid foundation, blah, blah, blah. But I think leaders are getting better and better at delivering what, let's just call it bad news and not hiding it and realizing that hiding it makes just everyone panic because then it gets hit them. They should know that it's coming and they should also know it's probably them that might have to go. And that happens. I see people go 2 months, redundancies are happening in about a month's time. I suspect due to my level in the company that getting rid of me is like the same as 4 salaries on that level. And then it needs to be 1 leader. And I suspect they'll merge those things. And I suspect X, Y, and Z, And so I think people are better prepared and leaders are better at delivering that and being more transparent, but you can't be you can be over transparent and then you deliver it wrong, then everyone panics. There's no need to panic. So of course there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, 100%. Don't say it if it's
a maybe.
Don't speak too soon and constantly make people fear for their lives.
Because their emotions will go up and down like that. Yeah. Their emotions go up and down like that. And I think. Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to communication, right? Which is what we're talking about here. Everything that you do is communication. You've got your HubSpot, you've got your market, you've got your offshore, and you've got the services that you provide, and they're all how to communicate more effectively with your team, with the offshore, and how to communicate more effectively with your potential customers. And I think everything always comes down to learning better communication skills in general. Help us all to listen more than talk so we can understand other people and realise they've come from a different lens on the situation to us. More empathy, more kindness maybe, more compassion. And I think those things just help everything move along nicely.
Couldn't agree more.
In the right direction. So if somebody wants to get hold of you, Ben, how would they go ahead with the HubSpot or with the services or with the offshore? What do they need to do?
That's very easy for us, and it should be because we develop HubSpot websites and HubSpot for people. All roads lead to Rome. If you go to ttprocess.co, any form that you find anywhere on our website, right, will give you the option to put your details in and select what it is that you want to talk to someone about. It will then give you the option to book directly into somebody's calendar to have a conversation about that exact thing. So super easy to opt in and have a chat to somebody, but obviously all of the info is there on the website as well in terms of the services we offer and how we work with our clients.
And I would like to say that even our podcasts we've done together and, communication that we've had, I think trust is the number one. To me, the trust is the number one thing that comes out through everything. When I talk about sales 15 years ago, I never talked about trust very often. And now it's like it's the backbone of relationships, right? So you call me up and say, hey, let's do this, or I call you, hey, and we trust each other, and that's it. And I think I can say hand on heart that as an organisation dealing with you and looking at what you do and the amount of material and this the rev up and everything that you're doing is just such good quality. And you know what really did it for me, Ben, and we can have this as some lasting thoughts, is when I talked to you originally last time, off mic, about taking somebody on. And you know what really did it for me? You won't know this, but you talked about that team member that might be offshore, or that 1 or that 10 or that 30 or whatever. And the way I can't remember the words you used, but you were saying, you got to love them. You got to love them. They're part of your team. You got to go in and this person's part of your team. It's the same. And everything you do with your normal team member will be the same. And the way you described it, I just remember I sat here after just like 10 minutes just taking that all in. And it was quite different to, I think, how I pictured it to be, if I was being really honest. And I thought, wow, he's really nailed why it works. And I can see now why, as a company, it works. Because you're teaching people, when you take somebody on, they are part of your team. And respect them and honour them and do everything you would do with your team. They just happen to be not in your office. And just that whole lens that you came in, that whole angle, just made me go afterwards, well, that's why it's working. That's why it's working. That's why he has so many success stories. Because, you're looking at it from a smart level of going, well, there's an individual somewhere that's working really hard for you, and they're not in your office, and maybe your other team aren't in your office, but they might have a different connection with you and your team, and maybe you can get together for conferences or something, and this person maybe isn't. And how are you making sure that you take that into account? And you had a long list of things to take into account. I remember thinking, that's brilliant. I can see why they work well with your businesses. I can see how they are sticky, they stay. I can see how they bring value to the businesses. I can see that it's a two-way. And that whole conversation we had was really quite impactful, made a big impression on me, actually. And I walked away from that thinking, okay, that's what it all means, that you've got another wonderful team member that's got the same purpose and got the same vision and lives the same values, and that's what you've got. You've got another member of your team.
Yeah.
So I want to say thanks for sharing that with me before. And thanks for sharing some stuff about, trust the process. The word process, I'm going to go back to the recording and just hear how many times we say the word trust the process, and for sharing some, what businesses work really well. And you've shared, as you always are, as honest as you always are, what things don't work well, because you want successes for people, and I understand that. You'll be able to be very clear and manage your expectations going in. And so I really enjoyed this time together, hearing more about you and trust the process and all those 3 services that you offer. So thank you.
Oh, massively appreciate it. This has been fun, flipping the script, doing it a different way. Super appreciate it. But what about for you, Charmaine? Anybody that wants to reach out and get in touch with you, what might they reach out about, and where do they reach you?
They immediately go on smarterselling.com.au. Live chat, form, phone calls. We're a human being here. We can do it. And they're usually people, Ben, that would aligned with you, that they've got their automation maybe in place or not, and they want to have their leaders. They might be a leader themselves. They might have they might be doing the selling themselves, but they want to make sure that client engagement is the best version of themselves, that they're empowered and confident, and that they've got the skills necessary in 2023, 2024 and ongoing to really understand a customer. And it's so different selling to 5 years ago, 10 years ago. A great example is 15 years ago when I started training at this sort of level, we never talked really about emotional intelligence at all. We didn't talk about stress. We didn't talk really about organisation. Or processes, if I was being honest. And now I'd say organisation, process is the top one. And then, being present, listening, engaging, and allowing your stop thinking that sales is innate. Stop thinking it's innate and they know what to do. No other trade would you have where you'd go, you want to be a dentist, off you go, you know what to do. Like nothing else would do that, right? Nothing else would do that. But for sales, people seem to think, oh well, it's just sales, isn't it? So just get them on the phone.
You either got it or you don't.
It's like, where did that come from? And I used to agree with that. And now I'm like, it's a science.
It's a skill.
It's a skill and it's a science and it's a process. It's a process. And if you could understand people, if your intent and your heart, you've got to be sold on what you're selling, of course, but if that is to understand the person or the business, really understand it, then you're going to do well because you're going to ask better questions, listen better, probe better, be more curious, be more hungry, give a damn. That all comes out, not because you've been told to do it, but because your company's taught you that a sale is just you helping somebody else and there's money involved. So rather than called helping, we call it selling. And once you've just grasped that concept, you go in it not selling at, but you go in collaborating and partnering, and that whole position yourself as the trusted advisor, the authority in your field, the subject matter expert. That's how you approach each customer, and with passion and enthusiasm and a quick turnaround and being first in best dressed and all those things that we teach. So yeah, if anybody listening wants to hear about any of that suite of topics, then to reach out and we'll be happy to find out more about you and your business and really how we can be of service to you.
Fantastic. I strongly advise anybody that needs any help in the realm of sales, please reach out to Charmaine. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.